Hi there, welcome to Kneppy Invest. Time for a Brainchip update. I haven't done a video on Brainchip for quite a few months, maybe something like 9 to 12 months since I did a video on this company. But it is about time, particularly because of what's happening with the share price since the start of 2022, ever since January the 4th, which was a very, I won't say very important date, but it was an important date because it seems like January 4 was a time that Brainchip, or what Brainchip has been doing, was validated. And that's the way I look at that date, because when you have Mercedes Benz verifying they're using their Akita chip in their EQS electric vehicle, that does mean something. Even though Brainchip management says it's not price sensitive sort of information, I think you can see by the reaction of the market, it definitely was price sensitive. And we'll look at the reaction of the market as we go through this video. But the whole point of me doing this video is to do a technical update. So we'll be looking at a few charts, different time frames, also be comparing what's been happening over the past few weeks to what happened with Brainchip share price during September 2020, when we did see a parabolic lift in the share price during that period. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to comment on something I saw on Twitter. And Twitter is becoming one of my favorite areas to just browse through when it comes to companies, including Brainchip. And it seems like Brainchip has a lot of fanboys and a lot of, what's the opposite of fanboys? Well, non-fanboys on Twitter. I won't say they get into arguments, but I just like to see all these varying opinions, all these back and forth comments from these people who think Brainchip is going to be the biggest company in the world versus people who think Brainchip is a worthless company. And there was a comment I just want to focus on in regards to the valuation of this company. And I'll discuss this particular comment. And the comment was in regards to Brainchip having no revenue. And if it, of course, if it has no revenue, then it's a completely useless, worthless company. And then I'm going to discuss why that's not true, why there's some, you could say even there's an element of hypocrisy when people talk about, well, it has no revenue right now, so it's completely worthless, and they focus on that. And I'll talk about why that is hypocritical later in this video. And then I'm going to discuss how I value Brainchip. Now, I don't put a number to my valuation of Brainchip. It's all based off probability. So let's get stuck into the video. And the first step is looking at a technical update. And first step in the technical update is looking at the daily chart. I will be looking at 3 different time frames for Brainchip. Won't be looking at the weekly or monthly chart, just because what's been happening with Brainchip over the past, well, since the start of 2022, you can really only look at the daily chart and shorter term charts. And the 2 charts I'll be looking after this is the 15-minute chart and the 5-minute chart. And the reason I'm doing that is you can get different perspectives by looking at different time frames. And when we look at the daily chart, you can actually see, this goes back to the end of 2020, when there was a breakout on some positive news, and then the share price really went sideways for a longest period of time. We also saw a bit of a drop in volume, not a significant drop in volume, but we definitely saw a breakout in Brainchip share price in the middle of November. There was a high volume day, and we saw the share price increase from about 50 cents up towards 60 cents in one day. And then over the next few days, we saw a drop in volume as the share price dropped back. And that's very healthy. That's telling us there's not a lot of sellers out there. And then over the next few weeks, we saw a very similar pattern happen time and time again. A big up day followed by share price going sideways or dropping back a bit on low volume. But then we saw the definite breakout on massive volume on the 4th of January this year. And that coincided with the knowledge that Mercedes Benz is using their Akita chip in their electric vehicle. I think it's called the EQS. And the share price just zoomed up so quickly. In fact, the share price went from about 70 cents all the way to a high of $1.90. And you can just see the parabolic rise in the share price during the start of 2022 on increasing volume, which is very important. But as we get to the last day of trading, which was the 14th of January, this was probably the most interesting day of trading so far with Brainchip, because we saw the bulls remaining in control during the first half of the day. And then all of a sudden, it switched from being the bulls in charge to the bears in charge. And we started to see selling coming in. And that forced the share price down from $1.90 all the way down to $1.50, which incidentally is exactly the same share price that it opened up on the day. And when you look at this one-day candlestick, it's actually a Gravestone Doji. So what is a Gravestone Doji? Well, let's learn a little bit about that candlestick right now. Before I talk about the Gravestone Doji and what it might mean for Brainchip share price in the next few days, or maybe even the next few weeks, a couple of things I just want to mention here. First thing is, technical analysis isn't about absolutely predicting the future. It's all about probability. So when you see a particular candlestick, it doesn't 100% predict the future. There's always probability behind it. And what you are looking for are those sort of candlesticks which has a high success rate, maybe a 70, 80% success rate. So even though a Gravestone Doji means, or it's a fairly bearish signal, it doesn't mean the share price of Brainchip will fall in the future. It's just saying there's a greater chance it will. The other thing I should mention here is what a candlestick is actually portraying. So there's probably a lot of people who are watching this video who don't know what a candlestick actually is. So this is just a one-day price movement of a company over a certain time frame. So for a daily chart, this is all about the trading of the company shares in this one day of trading. If you're looking at a 15-minute time interval, that's about a 15-minute increments. 5 minutes, it's all about 5-minute increments. If you're looking at a weekly chart, the increment is 1 week. And what you're looking at here in a candlestick is an open, a close, a high, and a low. And with a Gravestone Doji, you usually see this at the end of an uptrend. And what you see here is a long upper shadow. So what does a long upper shadow mean? Well, for instance, with Brainchip on the 14th of January, share price opened at $1.50, reached a high of about $1.90, and then closed at $1.50. So that distance between $1.50 and $1.90 is that long upper shadow. And that small to no lower shadow is just how low did the share price get during the day. And I think for Brainchip on the Friday, the share price got as low as maybe $1.47. So not much of a lower shadow at all. And the body, almost no body at all. So the body just tells you the share price, or this is between the share price opening and the share price closing. And when you say there's no body, it means the share price open and close at exactly the same price. And in a Gravestone Doji, there's not much body at all, or no body, and that's exactly what happened with Brainchip on the 14th of January. Share price opened at $1.50, went to a high of $1.90, and then closed at $1.50. And this is a Gravestone Doji. So what does it mean? Well, in this little image from Forex Pops they just mentioned here, notice how the market was in an uptrend until the Gravestone Doji formed, and then what happened? It went down. But again, this doesn't mean that the share price of Brainchip will go down in the future. It's just saying there's a higher probability it will. And then from eLearn Markets by StockEdge, this is what they say about a Gravestone Doji. It is a significant bearish reversal candlestick pattern that mainly occurs at the top of uptrends. The construction of a Gravestone Doji pattern occurs when bulls are able to press the price upwards. However, an area of resistance is found at the high of the day, and selling pressure is able to push prices back down to the opening price. Therefore, the bullish advance upward was entirely rejected by the bears. And I'll talk about that when we look at the 15-minute and particularly the 5-minute charts. So let's have a look at another chart right now. I totally forgot which chart I was going to look at next, but this is going back in time to September 2020 when the share price reached a high of about 95 to 97 cents in September. So this chart is a daily chart that goes to September 22, 2020. And we can see an exponential rise in the share price during the period up until the share price reached that high. And during that period where the share price started to go exponential, we also saw a big increase in volume. And then on one day, we saw a fairly bearish candlestick, a fairly large body, but the share price opened or gapped up fairly high, and then there was a lot of selling during the day, and the share price finished lower at the day. In fact, it finished almost at what the share price opened or closed at the previous day. And that's a fairly bearish one-day candlestick. And then the share price fell by a fair bit over the next few weeks. In fact, the share price fell from the 80 cents range all the way down to about 40 to 45 cents. The share price almost halved in about 2 weeks of trading. So that's what's telling you could happen with Brainchip share price over the next few weeks. It could drop like we did see back in September 2020. I always like to look at different time frames when I'm looking at charts because you always can get different perspectives by looking at different time frames. If you look at the monthly, weekly, and compare it to the daily chart, you can get different signals. So even though when we look at the daily chart and that one-day candlestick of a Gravestone Doji is a little bit bearish, it's a bearish reversal signal, it doesn't quite mean definitely that the share price will fall in the future. So let's have a look at the 15-minute chart here, and then the next chart, we'll look at the 5-minute chart and see if they're telling us anything different. And in fact, when we look at the 15-minute chart, the uptrend is still well intact. In fact, the share price closed at $1.50, which is right on the 50-minute moving average. And that could actually be a buy signal for those traders who only look at the 15-minute chart. The other interesting thing about this chart is it goes back to the start of 2022. And we actually can see the breakout in Brainchip share price at the start of January the 4th when people became aware that Mercedes Benz was using their key to chip in the EQS electric vehicle. And the share price just kept on rising from then. A really good momentum behind the share price. And in fact, the biggest 15-minute periods in terms of trading was always when the share price was increasing. And you can see that by the volume. And whenever you see the volume in green, that's telling us that there's a lot of buying coming in, pushing up the price. And we don't really see any large volume down 15-minute periods until we get to the middle of January the 14th. And that was the signal that maybe the bears were taking control of Brainchip's share price and the movement in the share price. We can see a large 15-minute drop in Brainchip's share price. It actually fell from about $1.75 all the way down to $1.57 in that 15-minute period on large volume. And that was a signal to maybe take in or take out some of your profits. And that was a signal to me to lock in some profits. So you can gain a lot of information by looking at different time frames with charts. Now let's have a look at the 5-minute chart to see if we do see something different there. As we look at the 5-minute chart with Brainchip, nothing really bad at all here from the start of this period, which was January 11 all the way to the middle of trading on January the 14th. Share price was increasing. And in fact, we did see increasing volume during that period as well. The other thing you'll notice is the highest volume was on open on both the 13th and the 14th. So people were getting excited by what happened with Brainchips the previous day. Maybe overnight, people were hyping this up on Hot Copper, on Twitter, that sort of thing. And that's why the share price opened up by about 10% each day. And then share price kept on rising for Brainchip on the 13th. It was rising all through that day. And then on the 14th, it rose for the first half of the day. And we can see a lot of green bars on that day, or green volume bars on that day. Not a lot of selling, so not a lot of red bars until we got to the middle of the day. And that's when the selling came in. That's when the bears took control of the trading of Brainchip. and the bears sent the price down from $1.90 all the way to back to $1.50. Now, there was a 15-minute period, and as we saw in the 15-minute chart, where there was a lot of selling. And we saw 2 5-minute periods during that time when the share price did fall from $1.75 to about $1.57. And the last 5-minute period there, that was on pretty high volume. And then the selling dried up, share price started to rebound, but the share price rebounded on really weak volume. And what that was telling traders, there was no buying coming in to pick up all the supply that was added. And that's actually a bearish signal, that there's not enough buying demand, and that can be a signal to traders to start selling again. And we actually did see that later in the day. We saw a renewed interest in selling, and the share price fell from about $1.65 to $1.50. So a lot of traders, a lot of day traders would be trading Brainchip because of what's been happening over the past few weeks. And traders, particularly those short-term traders, love volatility, and Brainchip has been giving those day traders volatility in spoonfuls. Now let's turn our attention to the valuation of Brainchip. And the inspiration behind me going down this path is just a quick Twitter comment I saw recently. This was written on the January the 7th at 12:43 p.m. And I do find Twitter quite amusing when it comes to Brainchip, because there's a lot of toing and froing from bears and bulls of this company. A lot of fanboys out there who want to say Brainchip share price is going to the moon, the value of the company is going to the moon. And then on the other side, a lot of bears out there who don't understand how Brainchip's market cap can be $2.5 billion, or I think it even got to as high as $3 billion. And I just want to address this right now, because I do see a similar thought among a lot of Brainchip bears. And I do think there's a possible hypocrisy in there, because one of the bears I do know, they totally disregard looking at financial statements. And the reason they don't look at financial statements is because financial statements is only showing you where the company has been in the past. It's not showing you where the company is going in the future. And when you tell me the reason you don't like Brainchip is because it has no revenue, that's all about the past. It's not about the future. When someone says that Brainchip has no revenue, you really have to question how they calculate the valuation of any company, not only Brainchip. Because the true definition of the value of a company is just the present value of all their future cash flows. And the current revenue of a company is completely, well, not completely, but it is irrelevant. Because Brainchip has no revenue right now doesn't mean it's going to have no revenue in the future. It might have $1 billion of revenue by 2025. We just don't know that right now. So determining the value of Brainchip is trying to determine how much cash flow it's going to generate in the next 5, 10, even 20 years. And that is actually really hard to do, because we just don't know at this point in time how much revenue, how much cash flow this company is going to generate. Now, the bears might say, well, it's going to generate zero cash flow. That is a possible outcome. But the problem here is there are so many possible outcomes when it comes to the future of Brainchip. Valuation is hard for companies like Brainchip. I would say if you went back to 1997, just when Amazon listed on the NASDAQ, or whatever exchange they listed on, trying to determine the value of Amazon at that point in time was almost nigh impossible. In fact, over the next 10 or so years, anyone who did a DCF, which is a discounted cash flow for Amazon, would have been completely wrong, because they would not have thought that Amazon could have kept on growing as they did over the next 20 years. In fact, when you do DCF, you tend to be really conservative with your growth estimates. So I don't like using DCFs, and particularly I don't like using DCFs for big growth companies, which Brainchip more than likely will be in the future. How do I come to a valuation of a company like Brainchip that has no revenue, and the future cash flows of the company are really hard to determine. So I don't give an absolute number. That's ridiculous. Even a range of numbers, I'm not going to give. What I usually do is I have a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. And more than likely, the result of Brainchip, or the end result of Brainchip eventually, will be somewhere in the middle. And in fact, it's more likely to be tilted towards a worst case scenario, because the worst case scenario is more likely to happen than the best case scenario. Now, the worst case scenario is easy to imagine. Brainchip goes bankrupt. The share price goes to zero. Now, that could happen for a myriad of reasons. Maybe a competitor comes onto the scene with a much better chip and it makes Brainchip Akita obsolete. That definitely could happen. Now, you might say that's unlikely to happen right now, but it could happen. And there's actually other reasons, other scenarios where it plays out where Brainchip just does not make it in the business well. But that's not the reason why I took or made an investment in Brainchip. The reason I decided to make an investment in Brainchip is all about the best case scenario. And a best case scenario could go something like this. Everything that the company and the management do from here on in is a complete and raging success. And at this point in time, we are thinking about possible uses for the Akita chip. And eventually we realize the possible uses of the Akita chip are massive. In fact, it's more massive than we even imagined. And the growth of this company just explodes in terms of revenue and cash flow. And we see the value of this company just climb. It goes to 5 billion, 10 billion, 20 billion. Eventually, maybe Nvidia decides it wants to buy out the company, it puts in an offer for $50 billion. And then Brainchip management says, no, we can go even larger. And then we see a valuation of 100 billion because this company just keeps on growing at an exponential rate. And eventually it becomes the biggest company on the ASX. And then it becomes one of the biggest companies in the world. Could that happen in the future for Brainchip? Probably not. I think the likelihood of that happening is fairly low. But when it comes to many or most Australian companies, I don't see that sort of future in their timeline. But for Brainchip, I actually can see that sort of future. More than likely, it won't happen. But because I can see that sort of future potentially happening, that's why I took a position in this company. Just because the best case scenario is one of the best case scenarios currently on the ASX. That's all I have for this update to Brainchip. Did I mention that I actually did lock in some profits on January the 14th? And what I did was I took out my initial investment and a little bit more. So right now, if Brainchip goes to zero, I will have made 40% profit with this company. Now, more than likely, what I'm going to do with that extra cash I have by selling out or taking profits is I might trade that in the future, because Brainchip does tend to be a really good trading company, and then I'll try to build up my holdings of this company in the future by doing that very thing. So if you do want further information, clarification on this company, just leave your comments, your thoughts, your questions in the comment section of this video. Otherwise, I am not a financial advisor. If you do need financial advice, make sure you seek out someone who is qualified and can speak to your own financial needs. That's it for this video. Have a good day. Talk to you later. Bye.